Dynasty 101. This is where me and Danny are going to break down some of the fundamentals of playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. This will be episode 1 of Dynasty 101, evaluating your league market. Basically, we're going to go through 5 tips to evaluate the macro market of Dynasty, the general, philosophy behind most Dynasty players' thinking, and then 3 tips that are more actionable, practical things that you guys can do in your own startups. Some of these things will be things you can do pre-startup. Some of these things are just principles to keep in mind throughout the duration of your Dynasty League. But this one should be really fun. Danny, how you doing today?
Doing well. And yeah, one of the critical fundamentals that you guys should be applying to every single one of your Dynasty leagues. We're ready to break it down for you. The market is obviously crucial, both the macro and micro, in making some of the key decisions and ultimately turning over your team.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's hit it. All right, so I didn't mention it in the intro, but this will be the only one that we have available on YouTube. If you guys are interested in seeing the rest of the series, they'll be kind of shorter, like I said, niche topics, macro-based kind of game theory stuff for Dynasty Fantasy Football. That will, of course, be available on our new website, flockfantasy.com/FSE is how you can sign up over there. You can do a free 2-day trial to check out some of the content for yourself. And then obviously we have monthly and annual packages as well. Using that promo code FSE will get you 30% off. And if you enter before Saturday and fill out the Google form in the pinned comment or the description down below, then you could be entered for a chance to be in a listener league with us. And we will be drawing the names for that on Saturday. You guys should be seeing this around Friday afternoon when it first goes live. So let's start with the macro market tips. And I think these are more so principles to keep in mind pre-startup, because pre-startup, you don't really know what the behavior of your league is, especially if you don't know the league mates, right? Like if you just join, a Dynasty League with people on Twitter or people in our Discord or whatever the case is, you might not be familiar with the tendencies of those players. Therefore, you might not know, how they behave. So these macro market tips are things to keep in mind as like a general philosophy about most Dynasty players. But of course, they could differ league to league. So let's start with the first tip. And Danny, I'll let you take it away with how we want to approach our startup drafts, especially if you don't know anything about, the league market that you're entering.
Yeah, for sure. Let's just say you're a member of flockfantasy.com. Maybe you get into the listener league with us and you don't really know about exactly how you should be attacking your draft. Well, my number one point in regards to the macro market, my number one tip is to always prioritize value accrual in the early stages of your league. We're talking about, the first 2 years of your league. You should not be focused fully on that point production, but rather, how can I get a valuable dynasty roster? And sustainability and proper asset management is your number one priority when it comes to attacking your teams. Your team is not really a team per se. This is not a redraft league. This is not where you're drafting, August 28th, getting ready for the NFL season, and whoever wins basically takes home the championship. You have to manage this portfolio and get as much value as you possibly can. Like I kind of mentioned in redraft, everyone in the league has one common goal, and that's simply scoring more than the guy across from them. Whereas in Dynasty, your goal, yes, that's the eventual goal. You want to score more than the person across from you, but it shouldn't come on the expense of heightened opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is your best friend. If you're going out of your way to accrue some point production in your startup, you could be left by year 2 or 3 with a desolate roster that, quite frankly, looks prime for a rebuild, look prime for maybe even an orphan.
Yeah, and we've seen plenty of dynasty leagues that we've been in where people sell the draft picks. They go in all in on veterans and draft a bunch of running backs that are aging and all that kind of stuff. And, they're orphaning the team, a year later. And I know a lot of people don't like that. So our goal here is to make sure that you basically create a dynasty, right? It's called Dynasty Fantasy Football for a reason. Some teams in the NFL have proven that, going all in for a championship works, but in the true case, we see a team like the Kansas City Chiefs that has, their franchise quarterback, their cornerstones, and they can build out a true multi-year competitive window rather than, the Los Angeles Rams or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had these short winning windows that are not quite as sustainable. They got Super Bowls out of them, but they didn't necessarily, build for the future as well as the Kansas City Chiefs might have, for example.
No, exactly. They built it the right way. A lot of their, key critical players are guys that they attained through the draft, especially, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, future Hall of Fame type of players. Your main goal in your dynasty league, especially in those first 2 years, is you got to accrue these type of players. The most valuable players usually come in the form of draft pick equity, which, especially in the startup, a lot of people will just undervalue. A lot of people will throw around to try to get the players that they have their eyes in. It's a human psychological need sometimes that we see somebody that we like, we'll do anything in our power to go and attain it. So the startup is a great way where if you're not attached to name values of players, you can get a ton of draft pick value or maybe quarterback equity, young ascending wide receiver talent. Those are the pillars to be able to build a sustainable dynasty team. And I repeat, only when you're ready to contend and have that high team value, that's when you can leverage some of your pieces of high value to go get some point production. But only when you've already built up that foundation. You see people doing it way too prematurely, try to go all in way too early, and they're left with a roster that A, can't contend, and B, doesn't have the shelf life to be able to contend in the next couple years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big part of that too, and building up that value, is knowing positional value and how dynasty players are going to kind of value certain position groups. And that's basically tip number 2, basically, is certain position groups are going to have different values. And again, we're speaking in general, most dynasty players, not specifically your league, although that will be something that we touch on later when we get into the more like micro league market type of tips. For example, the quarterback position, obviously this is going to depend on league format. If you're in a 1 quarterback league, the quarterback position isn't going to be very valuable, but most of us, at least me and Danny, only play in super flex leagues. So the quarterback position is generally thought of as a highly valued position group, foundational position group in the long term. The running back position, again, generally speaking, the dynasty market doesn't value them highly. This could differ in your league, but for the most part, people have kind of caught on to the running back not being a position you want to over invest in. The wide receiver position, especially when they're young, they can ascend very, very quickly. If you see what happened with Garrett Wilson, Drake London, and Chris Olave this year, they went from, mid-20s wide receivers preseason all the way up to, top 10 wide receivers, and they're very difficult to acquire right now. That's generally how the market reacts to highly productive young wide receivers. The tight end position, aside from the true foundational assets, don't usually have a lot of long-term projectable value unless you're Kyle Pitts or somebody that has some kind of insulated value there. And then draft capital, this is one of the ones that will vary most from league to league, but I would say generally speaking, most people understand that draft capital is a pillar to building dynasty teams. It's a pillar for your first round picks, for your second round picks, third round picks, whatever the case is. And most people are hesitant in giving up draft capital. So this is something that a principle that you want to enter most of your dynasty startups, especially if you know absolutely nothing about the other managers in the league, is that how, relatively speaking, that certain position groups are going to be valued. Quarterbacks and superflex are going to go off the board quickly. Running backs are probably going to slide. Young wide receivers are going to go off the board quickly. Tight ends, outside of the foundational guys, are probably going to slide. And when you understand and get a feel for how each position group is generally valued and generally behaves in the startup, it gives you a good idea of what your strategy should be and how you can kind of recognize when somebody has slid far in value or is a value or maybe overdrafted or whatever the case is.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, this kind of tails into understanding the opportunity cost in your startup, particularly, right? If you're on the clock, let's just say you're at the 208, right? And you're eyeing the 102, which is a very, very, high value draft capital piece. You get a guy like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, or you just hold it to the mercy of your league, whoever they prefer. You could sell that asset for a lot of value. You're eyeing that. You're eyeing a guy like Christian McCaffrey, or maybe you're eyeing, a set quarterback piece. You're going to lean the more valuable positions in that case. You're going to lean the quarterback. Let's just say, Dak Prescott falls to you at that point. You're going to lean the draft pick. You're not going to be leaning the running back because once you leave that startup, you're never going to get back 102 worth of value. You're never going to get back Dak Prescott worth of value for a guy, let's just say like Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this almost kind of dovetails right into the next thing too, because a lot of dynasty players are impatient, and this could apply during the startup, before the startup, or once they actually have a roster, like you kind of already talked about. And we get this question all the time, right? You guys will send us your rosters for dynasty decisions, and you're like, is my team good enough to contend, right? That's the number one question we get pretty much all the time. It likely means that you need something from the market. If you're asking that question, and you don't already know that you're good enough to contend, it's probably that you need something, right? You need a second quarterback or a third quarterback. Maybe you need another running back, a wide receiver, some depth, a tight end, whatever the case is. In most dynasty leagues, patience is an extremely valuable virtue because most dynasty players are impatient, especially for those of you guys that listen to our content. You're probably building out, as we kind of talked about, more value insulated type of startup teams entering the first year of the Dynasty League. But where a lot of people make the mistake is that after that first year, maybe they get a couple draft picks or whatever, add a couple rookies to the team. They're just all of a sudden ready to go all in, right? They did the 1 year punt and now they're ready to go all in. But for us, the mindset of accrual of value doesn't necessarily just mean for 1 year. It means eventually you may have a decision point where you have to evaluate your league. Say, there's 2 really good teams in this league and the other teams are, not as good as mine. Now is the time to compete. But the real tip here is that it shouldn't really be a conscious decision. You can evaluate those other teams consciously, but your team will kind of tell you when it's ready to compete, right? You'll look at your team after all the value accrual, realize that you have 6 wide receiver ones on your team in Dynasty and, 3 RB1s and 2 elite quarterbacks and a great tight end. And then you're like, I don't have to make the decision to say I'm consciously competing now because I've spent most of the war chest of picks that I built up over the last year or 2 years, whatever the case is. I already built around my stable foundation of a team. And this is why we use the term house money year all the time. You guys have probably heard us say that a million times in Dynasty Decisions videos. And the reason we say that is because it's better to have a wait and see approach with an already solid foundation type of team. And if your team starts to break right, if that, wide receiver breakout candidate on your team turns a corner and he's a top 5 wide receiver in redraft, then you can make those moves, those small moves, again, to help push your team over the top. Go out and acquire, some RB2, RB3 production during the season like a Jamal Williams type would have given you this year.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. The key thing that everybody has to remember is if you are explicitly going out of your way and asking the question, is my team ready to compete? 90+% of the time, the answer is no. If you have to ask the question if your team's ready to rack up some wins, there's probably a better team. There's probably even 2 or 3 better teams in your league. You want to make sure that when you are ready to compete, it's not a question. It's a certainty. You'll know based off your roster, based off, relatively what the other rosters in the league will look like. Yes, I have a very, very good chance of being a top 2, top 3 overall seed in my league. And it's not just a team that, maybe I'll scrape by in the 5-6 spot and maybe get an upset in the first round and then maybe upset a top 2 team. No, you cannot map out these optimism scenarios in your head. You have to be pretty certain that you're going to be a top 3 team in your league and have a really, really good chance at a championship.
Yeah, and that's why we say Dynasty players are generally impatient. And for the most part, this applies during startups as well, because we always talk about during startups, people get impatient to make picks. Like, I'm not even talking about a couple months go by and they want to make a trade. I'm saying like a couple days go by and they want to make a startup pick. Like, they're that impatient sometimes, and they'll give you, whatever you want, right? They'll give you a 2024 first and a 7th round startup pick to go up to the 4-2 and draft Jameson Williams because they absolutely need to have him on their team. Dynasty players are impatient. It's an inherent truth of the macro market of Dynasty players, especially for more casual Dynasty players and players that don't really know what they're doing. So that's something that you can absolutely understand going into a startup. If you are willing to sacrifice time, if you are willing to be patient, then you're going to be well ahead of a lot of the people that are in your league, especially if you're playing with, redraft players that you're just starting your first Dynasty league with.
It all stems back to human psychology, because in the other person's head, the cost isn't really important to them, but the cost is always the most important thing, most important baseline that we have to consider when we're making deals. When they're not focused on the cost and they're focused on the player, and whether that's, being the first in on a player saying, oh, you know what, I traded up and I took him, at 406 when his value should be, the 507, and I gave up this value because I know he's going to hit. That's a level of, overconfidence that some people will exude sometimes that you can take advantage of. And it's a market quality that we'll see every single year. We'll see it in startups. We'll see it in the off season. People are willing to, buy huge on some players that they really, really, establish in their own head that they're going to break out, and they will do anything in their power to make sure they acquire said player.
Yeah, and that could almost be a tip of its own, right? Is that certain people are going to value certain players highly, and the key is to exploit the market rather than try and outsmart it, right? And we always talk about that. Some people are super high on Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they're going to take him over elite quarterback prospects. Some people are super high on, Jahmyr Gibbs, and they're going to take him over quarterback prospects. Some people hate Anthony Richardson. They're going to fade him into oblivion rather than fading him to a point that they're probably just not going to get him in a rookie draft, rather than, putting him all the way at the end of their rankings and saying, no matter what, I'm not drafting this guy type of scenario. So we could probably move on to the next tip, which is basically understanding the right times to buy players and what types of assets that you want to buy. And again, this kind of goes back to the first point of value accrual.
Yeah, 100%. And I was going to say this transitions well from the last point we just made from point three. In Dynasty, the common thing for a lot of people is, looking at their teams. We're in early March right now. Combine just happened. People are looking at their teams, spotting that they're weak in certain positions, and they may try to make that upgrade move now because they want throughout the offseason to be able to look at a team and say, hey, like, listen, like this team's looking stout. I got like Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, et cetera, whatever the case may be. That's just a micro example. But players want that level of assurance that when they look at their team, they can envision themselves being a very, very good contender. However, as we know, if you guys have been watching the videos for a while, our advice here is that if you're going to buy anyone this early in the cycle, you have to prioritize and make sure that they hold some liquidity against their floor range of outcome. If they tear their ACL or if a veteran is signed above them, what exactly happens to the fluctuation of their market value? If it doesn't get affected much, they're a stable asset that you should be invested in. If it's going to get affected a ton, you should not be buying them at this point of the year because let's face it, we're in March right now. We're what? 6 months away from the season even counting. Why hold that level of risk of guys like Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey? Why pay their market value now for the point production that you expect this upcoming season when now you're holding all of the downside risk throughout the offseason? Like I said, injury, let's just say a backup running back gets added in the draft. Maybe, I don't know, for the Vikings' sake, maybe they got Madison, but let's just say for the Browns' sake, maybe they draft a third or fourth round running back to compete with Nick Chubb. You never know some of these scenarios right now. So by paying full market price when that price is realistically not going to be unchanged at the best case scenario by the season start, you're just losing out on value and you're just losing out on the certainty that those guys are going to be set producers for you come season time.
Yeah, human beings, like you said, they don't really like uncertainty. So the fact that people want to fill out their lineups and feel good about their team and just look at the team for the next like 5 months, it's a legitimate thing. Like it sounds silly, but it's a legitimate thing that people do. And people are always focusing. I mean, you guys do it all the time in our comment section. You'll be like,
Yep.
I have this pick and this pick in the rookie draft. These are my needs. What should I do? It's like you don't have needs at this time of year. You're taking the best available player. And I mean, you mentioned all running backs. There's a reason for that because running backs inherently have more downside risk than other positions. So especially if you're a contender and you look at your roster right now and you're like, man, I got Jonathan Taylor as my anchor running back, but I'm looking pretty yikes at the rest of my running back spots. And you have a lot of rookie capital. You have some wide receivers that you could offload. Just wait. There's no reason to fill out your lineup right now. You don't need to roster a lineup in March. You don't need to think about that until late August, early September, when we actually have to start playing actual games. And if you're a contender, you need to fill out that production once you actually have a week one opponent. And you don't have that for another 5-6 months. So there's no real reason to make those types of trades. And the reason, and kind of an offsetting reason for that is because, especially if you're trading rookie picks for those players, rookie picks inherently do not lose value, which is tip number 5. Even if the perception of a rookie class fluctuates, because it does, right? In 2022, we were entering the year. We didn't know what to think of the class. It ended up being a down, type of class, but we still saw this class yield a lot of great players and a lot of people be hyped to draft said players. We, 2-3 years ago have been talking about the 2023 class, even though it's been relatively disappointing to our expectations to some degree. These picks have still gone up in value every single year, and they've still maintained high value. If you look right now at 2024 capital, early 2024 picks were valued as a top 70 asset. Just last year in July, it's now valued as the number 22 asset in Dynasty, according to Keep Trade Cut. And like I said, late 2023 first. Remember how we were talking about collecting these 3 years ago? And everybody was like, oh, they're a sure thing, right? Grab them. And even though this class has been, quote unquote, a letdown to some degree, especially in that late first type of area, they are still more valuable now than they were this time last year. The reason being for rookie hype season is because no matter how bad a class is or how disappointing a class might be, as the offseason progresses, the market has months to talk about these players. And by the market, I mean Dynasty Twitter, right? We are all arguing back and forth about these players. We watch them work out at the combine. We see them at pro days. We hear more hype about them. We hear Daniel Jeremiah types talk about how teams value them. And it doesn't matter how bad their prospect profiles might be. We still want them in rookie drafts. It's a universal truth every single year. And the underlying concept is that rookie picks are always a smart investment. It's like investing in, beachfront real estate. It's never going to go down in value.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, and I get it. This is not a one-to-one comparison. Now, obviously, Daniel Jeremiah, the NFL draft versus, rookie pick value in Dynasty, but teams have gotten smarter in the NFL in terms of being diligent in trading their draft capital. Other than the quarterback position, you don't see first round picks, even second round picks sometimes nowadays be the going rate for veterans on the market. And we saw a lot more of those trades happening, 2016, 2017, 2018. Hell, even look at this offseason. I know it's a very specific example, but the Cowboys got an all-pro corner for a fifth-round pick. Last year, they traded an all-pro receiver for a fifth-round pick. Teams in the NFL don't want to trade high draft capital. So why should you on your dynasty rosters? If you think about it, like you kind of said, every single one of those picks, late first, early first, all go up in value no matter what the perception of the class is. Because guess what? You're prioritizing what the market feels on it, not what you feel individually. If you want to make that choice when you're on the clock and say, hey, listen, I'm not the biggest fan of this class, don't sell it now. Sell it when you're on the clock and somebody's willing to, buy up at max value. Just because you're against the idea of a rookie pick or you're against, the 2024 class hypothetically, don't sell them now because by this time next year, they would have gone up 1.5 to 2x in value.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope because sometimes there is bubble burst type of moments where, mid-season this year, we were like, hey, maybe the 2023 class won't be quite as deep as it looked to be back like 2 years ago. But even still, like those picks still went up in value. It's just because it's the value of time, right? That's the reason that they're going up in value. It's because the draft is getting closer. We're starting to learn these players' name. That's creating more certainty in people's minds that they can actually visualize, hey, what is my 109 worth now versus 6 months ago when they had no idea what types of players would be on the board at that point in time. So even though they might not like that 109 is only going to get you Will Levis, Quentin Johnson, or Zach Charbonnet at the best case scenario, they know what that player and that pick actually means, which gives them a little bit more certainty in their mind. They know they could potentially get a quarterback, a potential, upside wide receiver, a potential running back, whatever the case is. So yeah, rookie picks, they're almost always a safe investment. And that is a universal principle pretty much in every dynasty league that you're ever going to play in.
And the last point on rookie picks before we move on to the micro market for the most part is rookie picks are the only piece in Dynasty that you could pretty much refer to as a placeholder. Having a placeholder where you don't have to put a name to the pick and you can just hold that pick and know, like you kind of said, it's not going to go down in value becomes much more attractive in future trade offers. Let's say hypothetically in your league market that the 109 and Dalvin Cook, let's just say, even though we would prefer the 109, let's just say in your league market that's about the going rate for a guy like Dalvin Cook. However, that 109 is going to appease to all other 11 managers in your league. Dalvin Cook maybe appeases to 3 managers in your league. That is the difference. Widening your whole market rather than just focusing on the set little, 3-piece of contenders in your league that would want your asset.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of already talked about it. Those are more the league principles, right? And these are things that you have to think about ongoing, whether you're in your startup, whether you're about to do the startup, whether you're in the league for 2 years at this point in time. These are things that you have to keep in mind because they're truths in Dynasty. It's things that we've learned over the past couple of years. These next 3 tips that we have for you is probably, if you're going to do them at all, going to happen on an ongoing basis. So you might jot down some of these tips at the beginning of your startup. You might jot down some of these tips during the startup or towards the end of it. You might jot down some of these tips as some trades start to happen in your league or after the first season or during the first season, whatever the case is. The first tip is brainstorm everything that you know about your league mates, right? These are practical things that you can actually do, right? And absorb information through trade talks and apply that to future deals. So write down everything you know pre-draft, right? Let's say you're in the middle, or your startup just started and you're looking at your league mates. Have you ever played in any leagues with these guys? Do you have any idea what their tendencies are? If you have played in leagues, let's say 3 of the players that you're in a league with, did they generally go with like a rebuilding type of mindset? Were they more so, win now type of contender dynasty players? What NFL teams are they a fan of? What college teams are they a fan of? Because that's going to factor in to their bias, right? If you have a Florida Gators fan on the board at 102 in a rookie draft, he might take Anthony Richardson, right? Like it's possible. Sometimes people do that. I know there's, Ohio State fans argue every day and twice on Sunday about Jackson Smith and Jigba all day on Twitter. So it happens. People factor it in, even though they say they're unbiased. Did you meet the team and the players that you guys are in a dynasty league with in our Discord? Because then they might be partial to some of the things that we say. Did you meet them in some other communities' Discord? Maybe they're partial to, let's say what Mason says over at Fantasy Flock. They might gravitate towards the players that community likes. And then during the startup too, you got to watch what they do, right? Because if you notice that, John Smith in your league took 6 wide receivers under the age of 24 in the first 8 rounds of your startup, then he probably overvalues age, and he probably only drafts players that are young. Therefore, if you try and trade for him after the startup is over, you're probably not going to get any young players for him unless you pay an arm and a leg. And veterans that he might have on his team might cost nothing. And same goes for John Hancock, who might have drafted 5 quarterbacks in the first 8 rounds of the startup. He probably intends to try and sell those quarterbacks off for a premium value. And you can either, face the reality of the situation, and he's gonna want an arm and a leg for those quarterbacks, or you can wait to see if the market cools off and buy them later. So brainstorming everything you need to know about your league mates is definitely a huge strategy factor that's very simple to do and very practical to do, yet nobody would really do it.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, this, you mentioned it in the startup. This even applies to the rookie draft. You kind of mentioned the JSN example. So let's just say you're in Ohio and there's going to be big time Ohio State Buckeyes fans. And in your own view, you only view the top tier of the dynasty board in rookie drafts right now as being Bijan and the quarterbacks. Well, if you have the 105 and you personally view it as a tier break from the quarterbacks and Bijan, but you know that somebody in your league is going to value JSN in that tier, ask for that value, because somebody more than likely is willing to pay that value for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that could apply to you being at 103 or whatever, and somebody wanting to hop everybody and come and get JSN, and you could trade down to 105 and still get one of the quarterbacks as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can find out about your league mates, even if you know nothing about them going into. These are like 11 complete strangers. You've never met them before. You have no idea what their league tendencies are. Just by the first 4 to 5 rounds of the startup, you're going to start to get pieces of information on how they actually behave. And then for those of you guys that have been in 10-year dynasty leagues with your college buddies or whatever, you probably know exactly how they behave. You know exactly the types of players that they're interested in, exactly the types of draft picks that they're interested in, and, college teams and NFL teams that they invest in. So that stuff is definitely also valuable as well. Number 2 is kind of using that information to help influence specific market value. And this kind of ties back into this first point too, except instead of, brainstorming it and writing it all down, you're actually using it to create an idea of what your league's micro market is and how it might differ from the macro principles that we talked about in the beginning of the video. So I talked about how, in Superflex leagues, quarterbacks will be highly valuable, generally speaking, right? But in your league, if only 4 quarterbacks went in the first round, then that quarterbacks are not that valuable in your league micro market. So it doesn't really make sense for you to snag up all the quarterbacks and then try and sell them, because most people they showed you in the startup don't value quarterbacks that highly. Maybe this is their first time playing in a Superflex league and they don't really know how it works. You can use it to your advantage by getting great quarterbacks, but I wouldn't recommend overdoing it and then trying to sell them later or something like that. And also, instead of saying, John Smith overvalued youth, because you wrote that down when you brainstormed that he took 6 wide receivers in the first 8 rounds under the age of 24, you might realize that not only did he do that, 9 other players in your dynasty league did the exact same thing. And then in general that this type of dynasty league might be the type of dynasty league where it favors you to go with a more contending window type of team, because everybody is trying to go young. And when everybody's trying to do one thing, it's going to dilute that market, and you're better off doing the other thing. So simple math would tell you that if there's 3 contenders in your league and 9 rebuilders or 8 rebuilders, then you should probably try and contend if you're on the fence about what you should do. And same goes with the other side of things. If 9 people are trying to contend in your league and there's only 1 guy hoarding all the draft picks, then maybe you should try and rebuild as well.
Yeah, for sure. It all comes at an opportunity cost. You have to understand, what's my opportunity cost if I want to compete, and what is the likelihood of me winning? Versus if you want to rebuild, what's the likelihood of me actually tanking this team to the 101, the 102, the 103 portion? Because like Corey said, if 7, 8 other teams are rebuilding and you want to join that group, there's a scenario where you make the playoffs with a less than ideal team and you don't get the advantage of the tank. The advantage being obviously getting a high draft pick for the following year. Let's just say right now you want to tank for Caleb Williams. Well, if there's 6, 7 other teams tanking for Caleb Williams, there's a small likelihood you would get Caleb Williams. Whereas if there's 3 teams tanking and you're one of the 3, and hey, my ceiling range of outcome is I get the 101 next year and I get Caleb Williams is going to be a top 8 startup pick, versus my floor outcome is, oh, boo-hoo, I'm stuck with Marvin Harrison Jr. Yeah, it's much easier to make that decision to go and rebuild your team, and vice versa. If you really, really want to contend, but 9 other teams want to contend and 9 other teams are leveraging future draft picks and putting their future value at risk just to try to win a championship year 1, then your best bet is to go into a rebuild, and then vice versa. Like I kind of said, everybody rebuilding, you want to contend, you're more likely to be able to win the championship. So overall, it's kind of a yin and yang effect where you don't want to do what everybody else is doing. You want to best position yourself to either get, value in terms of monetary value from your league, or value in terms of building your team up to be a dynasty long term.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like how your brainstorming can influence your specific league market and give you an idea of that. And then you also have another point here in the final point of the video, which is basically on a more micro player takes type of basis, because some people will have inherent biases, and this can happen in the general dynasty community. For example, a player like Miles Sanders this year in redraft and dynasty was a player we were all sick of, right? We were waiting for the breakout for like 3 years and we never got it. And that created an inherent bias in the general league market. But your league market might have inherent biases that is unique to your league.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this point kind of ties into both tip 1 and 2, but like we kind of said, using this information that you've gathered, that you brainstormed, using the information that you got from the whole league as like in general, and applying your league mates' behaviors and tendencies to determine how attainable certain assets are is going to be a big advantage for you. Because let's be honest, you may have a ton of assets. Let's just say you're in year 4, year 5 of your league, and you've already built up the assets. You've used all the other tips, and you've set yourself up in a good spot, but you really want Justin Jefferson added. Well, guess what? If the person that owns Justin Jefferson in your league is a Vikings fan, odds are he's not trading you Justin Jefferson for anywhere close to market value. As another manager in your league in love with youth / hates old players, when you're ready to push in, that's the ideal candidate for you to maybe pick up a Cooper Kupp, maybe pick up a DeAndre Hopkins, maybe pick up, an older veteran tight end like George Kittle, because he's just willing to sell everybody off maybe for 80 cents on the dollar because he hates old players. And that's when you can capitalize and turn your value you already accrued into potential point production to win the championship once you're ready to make that transition.
Yeah, and exactly. Write some of the stuff down if you need to. Like if you got make a little list under each of your league mates and be like, what do I know about this guy? I don't know much about him. Maybe I just know that he, because I played in the league with him, he rebuilt in the other 2 leagues that I played with him. So maybe he's more likely to rebuild as the startup goes along, as the season starts, as you get some trades on the market with this guy, you'll start to get an idea of his tendencies. Keep adding to that list, right? I learned in the league chat, because we were talking about it, that he's an Eagles fan, right? I learned in the league chat, because we were talking about it, that in another league, he sold a quarterback low. So he might not value quarterbacks very highly. So you can keep adding to that stuff until you get a big time generalized picture of what each of your league mates do. And then at that point, once you need something from the market, let's say you're rebuilding and you turn yourself into a contending window and you're like, okay, I need to buy some receiver production. Let's see who has Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams. And you look, and one of the league mates in your league that has, you wrote down that he doesn't like veterans at all, and he just has Devontae Adams sitting on his roster, then you could probably go and get Devontae Adams for cheap. So it sounds like a little aggressive. Like if you're in a lot of dynasty leagues, like 40 dynasty leagues, you probably can't do this. But if you're only in like 5 or 6 dynasty leagues like me and Danny are, then this is absolutely attainable. And a lot of the dynasty leagues that we're in have similar people in them too. So it's less and less work from that perspective. So I hope you guys understood this video. The whole point of this video was basically to give you guys some general principles from like a macro perspective, and then give you some practical ideas on how to exploit your league markets and develop what your league market exactly is, because it helps us too. When you send us your dynasty decisions submissions and you're like, hey, what do you think of this trade? My league overvalues quarterbacks, or my league undervalues running backs, or whatever the case is. It gives us an idea of how to best give you advice, because we're not in your league. We have no idea. At face value, a trade might sound terrible or good to us, but if your league market behaves a certain way, then it's, it goes one way or the other direction.
For sure. And the last thing I quickly want to mention too, which is very, very crucial and people have to understand, is yes, you may be in a 12-man league. Your ideal league market is of the 11 other owners in your league, the other 11 managers in your league. But you have to understand sometimes when you're in certain leagues that you have realistic sub markets that you have. Yeah, the 11-person league as a whole, 12-person league as a whole is going to be your whole league market. But sometimes when you're making certain moves, only 3 teams, 4 teams maybe fit the criteria for what you're actually looking for. So understanding who's most likely to give you what you need and who's most likely not to try to rip you from a value standpoint is going to be the best way to make advantageous moves for your successful window, whatever stage you're in.
Yeah, especially when it comes to trading, you're going to realize like if in your 12-man league, there's going to be like 3 managers in every league that are just impossible to trade with. Like they might completely overvalue their own players. They have no idea, how to trade properly, and they'll probably offer you trades that they would insta decline if it was them on the other side of it. And that's just the reality of most dynasty leagues. Unfortunately, like you can never, maybe you've been in dynasty leagues where everybody trades equally. I've never been in dynasty leagues like that. Even ones that we've started, there's obviously managers in each league that is they're going to be impartial to their players. And that is definitely not an ideal scenario. So like I said, this is the first episode of Dynasty 101. We broke this down in 5 or 6 episodes last year. This year, we really wanted to expand and talk about like really, really niche stuff, like stuff that is very, very drilled down, not just like generalized dynasty talk. So we're going to break down everything from how to spot a breakout, spotting a great buy low / sell high, what a stable investment looks like in Dynasty, handling the running back position, whether you're a rebuilder or contender, trades that help you tear it down and rebuild to the long term, making the switch when you decide to make that switch from rebuilder to contender, trading within a startup, draft strategy in the startup, positional value and all that kind of stuff, the value of rookie picks, all that kind of stuff. We will break down in individual videos, and that will be available only exclusively on flockfantasy.com. So if you guys want to check that out, make sure you sign up over at the site. If you want to just sign up for the 2-day free trial to check it out for before you buy anything, you can definitely go and do that. If you want to just go month by month and see how these kind of play out, to see if you're getting your money's worth, and you can definitely do that as well. Flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE is how you can do that. Like I said, we will have these videos coming out probably every Friday or every Saturday on the website, and they'll probably be a lot shorter than this one. This one was the first one. We had to give you guys a little bit of taste of what we were doing, so we went with basically 2 topics in one video, macro strategies and micro strategies. But the other videos should be a little bit more digestible, 15, 20 minutes, very drilled down on a niche topic. So definitely stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. Hit the like button and comment any of your thoughts down below. With that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Wire me the money.